Have you ever felt like you are just moving through a mental haze? That's brain fog, and it is an incredibly common and, let's be honest, super frustrating issue. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the science behind what's really going on in your brain, and maybe more importantly, what you can actually do about it. This quote right here really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? For so many people, brain fog isn't just some minor inconvenience. It's a genuinely debilitating condition that can seriously mess with your work, your school, and your life.
So, what are we actually talking about when we say brain fog? Well, it's not some formal medical diagnosis you can look up. It's more of a collection of symptoms. It's that mental cloudiness that makes thinking clearly feel like you're wading through mud. You might be forgetful, find it almost impossible to focus, and feel like even the simplest mental tasks take a massive amount of effort.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about why brain fog is so frustrating to deal with. Then, we're going to debunk a huge myth about what causes it. From there, we'll dive right into the 6 hidden physiological drivers. And of course, we'll wrap it all up with a real targeted action plan to help you get that mental clarity back.
Okay, let's just dive right in. The first major hurdle with brain fog is how it's so often misunderstood. And that, right there, leads to a whole lot of frustration for anyone who's going through it.
This leads to what I call the medical runaround. It's this really frustrating cycle. You go to a doctor, they run a bunch of tests, and everything comes back normal. So because the symptoms aren't easy to measure on a test, the problem sometimes gets dismissed as being psychosomatic or all in your head. And the next step is often a referral for mental health support, which completely misses the underlying physical problem.
But here's the crucial point. And honestly, this is a game changer. The latest science tells a very different story. Brain fog is a real physical condition. And just understanding that, really getting that, is the first step toward finding a real solution.
This slide makes a really important distinction. Over on the left, you've got the myth that it's a psychiatric issue. But here's the thing, it's not a recognized diagnosis in the standard psychiatric manuals, and therapists, they generally aren't trained to treat it. But the reality, over on the right, is that brain fog is a physiological and neurological condition. It's rooted in actual physical processes like inflammation in the brain and problems with blood flow. So if it's physiological, then what's actually causing it? Well, as more research has poured into this area, scientists have been able to pinpoint 6 key, interconnected factors that all contribute to that feeling of mental cloudiness. And this slide just perfectly illustrates how everything is connected. See, it's rarely just one single culprit. Instead, brain fog is usually the result of a combination of these things, like inflammation, poor blood flow, diet, and sleep, all kind of feeding into each other and creating that perfect storm of mental fatigue.
Okay, let's zoom in on inflammation for a second. As you can see here, it often starts with chronic stress. Stress releases a chemical signal, right? That signal activates these special immune cells called mast cells. And what do? They trigger inflammation directly in our brain and our nervous system, and that leads to the symptoms we call brain fog. It's a chain reaction.
All right, next up is something called low cerebral perfusion. I know, it sounds fancy, but think about that dizzy feeling you get when you stand up too fast. That's just a momentary drop in blood flow to your brain. Well, for people with brain fog, this can become a chronic, low-level issue, and it's often made worse by a sedentary lifestyle where our whole cardiovascular system just gets deconditioned. Whoa, okay, take a look at this number, 90%. A staggering 90% of people with brain fog also say they have poor sleep. That connection is just undeniable. Think about it. Sleep is like our brain's nightly cleaning crew, clearing out all the junk that builds up during the day. Without enough good quality sleep, that cleanup job just doesn't happen, and our brain can't function at its best. Simple as that. And here is another huge piece of the puzzle, hydration. 88% of people with brain fog in one study were also dehydrated. And it makes total sense when you think about it. Your blood is mostly water. So if you're dehydrated, your blood volume actually drops, your blood pressure can get all unstable, and your brain just doesn't get that steady flow of oxygen-rich blood it needs to think clearly.
All right, let's get to the most important part. Let's see how this all builds. Because now that we understand the physiological causes, we can stop guessing. We can stop with the generic advice and actually start creating a targeted, effective action plan.
This right here is where it all comes together. We can finally move beyond that vague advice like, oh, just be healthier, and get super specific. As you can see in this table, each cause has a targeted solution. We're not throwing darts in the dark anymore,
We're using science to address the specific physiological problem at its root.
Now, when it comes to exercise, the type of exercise really matters. It's not just about burning calories. We want to focus on movements that actively improve that all-important blood flow to the brain. So cardio that uses your legs, walking, running, is fantastic because your big leg muscles act like a second heart, pumping blood back up. And things like yoga, with all its bending and changing positions, actually train your vascular system to adapt and keep that blood pressure steady to the brain.
And your diet? It's an incredibly powerful tool against brain fog. Research points to these compounds called flavonoids. You find them in things like leafy greens and olives, and they have potent anti-inflammatory effects. They're basically neuroprotective, which means they help protect your brain cells from damage. So it's not just about eating healthy, it's about choosing foods that actively fight the inflammation where it starts.
So, here's the bottom line. Before you try anything complex, you have got to master the fundamentals. Consistent, high-quality sleep and proper hydration, they are the non-negotiable foundations. They provide the essential base that allows everything else we've talked about to actually work, to be effective for your recovery.
All right, so now you have a roadmap. This is not about completely overhauling your entire life overnight. It's about recognizing that brain fog is a real physiological issue that has real actionable solutions. The key is to just start with one manageable change. So, what's your first step going to be? Maybe it's just an extra glass of water today, a 10-minute walk, or maybe shutting down your screens an hour before bed. Your journey back to clarity, it starts now.